A creative strategy is a roadmap for a brand on how it communicates its value proposition to the target audience innovatively and engagingly. This is the real definition of creative strategy, but do you know it doesn't work this way in real life, in real marketing? The baseline of every creative strategy lies in understanding the pain points of target audience and understanding how the audience thinks. So for that, we have Rishabh Nair with us. He is the head of content and strategy in Tractors India Limited, and we will be shooting how creative strategy works, what all elements that a creative strategist keep in mind, what are the segments of creative strategy. So over to the podcast. Why is creative strategy important, and how does it contribute to achieving our business objectives?
Right. So I think first I start by talking about what creative strategy means to me and not the textbook definition of creative strategy. I feel every organization, every company, D2C, B2B, you have a product and there is a very important message about that product that you need to communicate to your target audience, right? And your competitors are also trying to communicate a similar message, if not the same. So creative strategy is not the what of the communication, but how you'll communicate it, right? Everybody wants to say, I'm the best speaker brand in the world. And every consumer knows that a company is going to try and tell me that. Part of the message is the quality of the product, the message itself, what is your differentiator?
Right.
So apart from the product quality being a differentiator, how you communicate that quality becomes more important in a lot of ways, and especially today in the consumer space, in the D2C space. So creative strategy is, for me, the how of how you communicate that message, right? So the way I look at it is, it becomes super important to create that impact, because either you will be spending money, you will be burning to get your message across, right? To multiply it. But if you've got good creative strategy, you get to save that money, because your audience, if you'll find the right target audience, and if your message resonates with them, they'll do the sharing for you.
Right.
So with the right creative strategy, you can save that money, right? So that's a direct business impact. If you do two campaigns back to back, one with clear business strategy and the other one where you've got that old school technical, मैं CPC देखूंगा, मैं CAC देखूंगा, you're doing it, but there's no creative strategy, you'll be able to calculate why your campaign is not working.
Right.
But with the right creative strategy, you may not be able to figure out why did it work, but you'll be happy that it worked and you'll see measurable results. I think the difference between good creative strategy and bad creative strategy is that good creative strategy is built based on consumer insights, right? And when I say consumer insights, it's not Globgyan. It can only happen if you get to spend some time with your users or you get to spend time with their feedback. And you've experienced, say, the product yourself. So if it's a tangible product, like a phone or a watch, etc., you can check out the product, right? But increasingly, a lot of brands today are services brands.
Right.
So if you're working at a company that is, if you're working at, say, a food delivery app, right? And you don't use the food delivery app, you can't make creative strategy for that brand.
Right.
So if you're working for, say, an investment app, right? And perhaps because I've worked in investment space, a lot of people who are part of the team have not used the product. So the creative strategy gets messed up there because they've not experienced the pain points of the customer.
Right.
So customer का क्या बड़ा problem है, वो मैं कैसे solve कर रहा हूँ, और वो क्यों मेरे पास ही आए, right? These three things can inform your creative strategy. And then your creative strategy itself can be many different things, right? These days, humor is a crutch that we use a lot, right? Funny hai to viral ho jayega, funny hai to it'll go. If you have the luxury of that for your brand, aap kar lo.
Right.
Sometimes your brand is serious,
right,
and you may not get that freedom where the brand does not want to be portrayed as a funny brand or takes itself too seriously.
Right.
There it becomes harder. But otherwise, if you create a strategy which identifies these things, right? So I'll go back to some like first principles of, say, communication, right? ये किसी ने भी अगर common communication पढ़ा होगा, he'll have the same things in their course, right? So it's called the 4 W's and 1 H, right? The what, why, when, where, how. I think सबसे पहले you answer that, right? And once you've answered that, that is kind of creating the base for your creative strategy. So once you know what you want to communicate, why you want to communicate it, and when you want to communicate it, you can figure out the how.
Right.
And that, again, like we said earlier when we were talking on the phone, it should be based on some form of data.
Right.
It should not be based on मेरे gut में ये feeling
my assumption.
या मैं 10 साल से काम कर रहा हूँ company में, so I know what the audience want, right? There are so many times where the founder does not know what the customer wants.
Exactly. I mean, बहुत जगहों पे ऐसे भी होता है कि founders start believing that this content is for me.
Yeah.
This is not for you.
Yeah.
This is for your audience.
Correct.
Right.
They feel like, oh, I don't like it. So what?
It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It is not for you.
It's not for
your
your
audience.
Correct. It's for the person who will ultimately buy your product.
Right.
Right. So it has to work for that audience. And at times you have an image of that audience in your hand. You've not really gone ahead. Patience नहीं होता है तो because I think creative strategy requires a lot of patience and time. And if you're looking for fast growth, then you spend your money, boss. Right. You burn and then you learn your lessons in your own way. But if you've got the patience and if you want to genuinely build a brand that will, over a period of time, get that respect from its consumers, there are no shortcuts.
Right.
Then you will have to spend this time on, understanding what people want and everything from age. मेरा कस्टमर कहाँ रहता है, मेरा कस्टमर क्या खाता है, मेरा कस्टमर कितने बजे उठता है. Once I know all of that, then maybe I have a chance of creating good strategy.
You'll be able to create personas around it.
Yeah, so that and personas also, I think when we do everything by the book, we destroy the entire. It's called creative strategy because you are doing something different.
Right.
It will not always be by the book and it will not always work 100% of the time.
Right.
If you don't have the patience to have that
experiment, समझना पड़ेगा ये चीज भी.
हाँ, and it's not like you don't. It doesn't mean that you keep an endless amount of time, right? You can say that okay, I have 6 months, and in this period I want to achieve this impact. Your team will ideally be able to tell you ये possible भी है कि नहीं. So that if that goal setting is fair, then it's possible, right? You can't go from 0 to 200k followers without doing some kind of घपला.
कुछ अलग नहीं है.
कुछ गलत करना पड़ेगा आपको. You might be happy because you got this, CMO जिसने आके ये कर दिया. And then you'll कोसो him a year later saying अरे इसने तो XYZ trick use किया था और मेरा brand खराब कर दिया. नहीं, आपने इतना pressure create किया. You didn't have the patience. So if you have the patience, you can do it. And I think it saves you money, yaar. In the long run, it saves you money because you were patient. You can tell your creative team, you do this. You take your time. And you can set smaller KPIs.
And try to understand brand, try to understand the audience, try to understand how you can fill that gap between your audience and your brand. So that is important, right. And you also need to understand how your audience think.
Yeah.
And एक बहुत basic सी चीज़ है, your audience they don't care about you until unless you start speaking about their problems or their pain points.
Correct. And in their language.
That is important. So can you share some example of creative strategies and how to yield results from those strategies?
Right, okay. So what I'll do is I'll talk about some of my favorite brands. So I'm also invested in it. And I'll talk about so that I can put my money where my mouth is. Right? And anybody who knows me knows that मैं वैसे भी इस brand का ambassador हूँ almost, right?
Nice.
So in a world full of Apple, I'm a OnePlus user, right? Wow. And as somebody who's been in branding for a long time, I'm sure you also sometimes do it. How did they sell to me, right? Because we also tend to be as marketers very critical of brands, and it's almost harder to impress a marketer because I feel like, oh, this trick I know, or this you're trying to do. So what OnePlus did when they came out, right, in a space where you were either, and at a time when Chinese brands had a negative image, right, where you could give me 20,000 features in a phone, but I would dismiss it simply because of the nation it's manufactured in, right? That's the space they entered, if you rewind a little bit. And in the presence of a behemoth like Apple, where it has insane amount of brand loyalty, right? So what OnePlus did very interestingly was they identified what kind of audience would buy their products, right? So it was in that aspirational category. The products now have become super expensive. Some of them, the flagships, but the OnePlus 1, the OnePlus 2, that category of phone was always value for money.
Exactly.
So they figured out India में value for money बिकता है, but value for money को value for money बोल के नहीं बेच सकते, right? I mean the disasters we know, right? Like if the Tata Nano was called the cheapest car, it didn't work. The optics around it matter. So they knew we have to create a value for money product, but we can't say it's cheap and we can't say it's value for money. वो customer को खुद समझ में आएगा, but he will pretend like he's bought a fancy product.
Right.
So when they started with this, they started with invite only kind of categories, right? They created that hype around it, and this is not a new thing, right? So many brands have tried to build up these invite lists and then launch hoga, but to do it successfully, they worked with the right influencers,
right?
And they worked with influencers at a time when influencers weren't aware that they are, potentially this powerful. So they found the right people at the right time, and their messaging around never settle, I think really resonates with that TG. And I was that TG at some point, right? And now I'm hooked onto the brand and I still use it because of that reason. But the one thing that they got right was they caught on to that aspiration. I was at that stage, perhaps a part of that user set that may have wanted an iPhone. I've never used it, never experienced it, but I could not justify to myself spending that much on a phone, right? Because and abhi bhi janta hai desh mein jo it is possible that I have friends who might make double digit lakhs every month, but they will not spend that money on a phone. So they caught on to that part saying, okay, never settle means I'll create a product where the customer is getting the features they want, the kind of product quality they want, the kind of brand perception they want, but they don't have to settle for another brand and pay a higher premium.
Exactly.
Right? That's what it kind of meant to me. And then I opted for OnePlus initially, not because of the brand, not because of the quality, because it promised everything I wanted at a price I could afford. Right? So those two check marks was essentially the creative strategy of building that hype around it and saying that this is the value prop. Right? That was interesting the way they did it, and it worked really well for them. I think in the long run. Of course, it's now getting diluted with the Oppo, Vivo mix and ownership, but ultimately what they created was a brand where people looked at it as value for money. And they knew that I will be able to argue with a phone that costs 2x in terms of features that I have, right? Even today, when you look at 120 hertz refresh rate, when you look at something like, a phone being able to have a fast charging, right? It's also utility. Since I bought the first OnePlus, I don't think I've ever worried about, मेरे phone में battery नहीं रहेगी. Right? Because I know, मेरे phone में battery रहेगी, and when it finishes, I need 5 minutes. Right? 5 minutes and it'll take me to the rest of the day. So finding those features that really matter. Perhaps to a different category of customers, a different set of features would work. But they found that audience, and their strategy was, let me focus on this guy. They knew the Apple guy is not coming to me.
Correct.
He's not going to sell his, iPhone 7, I think, and be like, chal, main OnePlus ka flagship le.
Right.
Very difficult to make that switch. Very few people made that switch, right? There's also the ecosystem. The trap of the Apple ecosystem is very
but
difficult.
reverse happens now.
Reverse is happening now. The trap of, they're trying to create that. So I think Samsung has somehow, in the Android space, managed to create that, right? And that's not creative strategy, but that's more product strategy. But they've been able to create that ecosystem. And you won't leave it. And it's just convenience, right? Now, I bought the OnePlus watch because I have the OnePlus phone, right? Why? Mentally you're thinking your compatibility better hogi.
Exactly.
Right? Do I not want to buy the Apple watch? I would have bought it, but will it work well with my phone? No. So that kind of solves the issue.
So how does it impact the brand perception and engagement?
Right. So let's take another example to cover this, right? Another brand that I love. So the first car I bought was the Kia Seltos. Right? Now, why did I buy Kia in a space where there's so many other brands, right? Again, the customer TG was someone who's got that 19 to 20 lakh, 25 lakh bracket. But he does not want to buy a vehicle that's another one on the market, right? So they created this entire badass by birth kind of image. And a lot of people believe today that Kia did that with their TVCs or they did that with their ads, right? Because that's what you see. But what they really did well was their content strategy. The number of organic keywords that Kia was able to rank and the traffic, and I told that I'll pull up my phone to get this stat right. I was looking at Uber Suggest and they had 7,30,000 organic keywords, right? They had 14 lakh plus monthly traffic, and they had insane number of backlinks and a domain authority of about 80 or whatever, right? So SEO, perhaps one of the most underrated ways to create your, to spread your
It's always been underrated.
It's always been underrated. Now they said, "Ye creative strategy bana liya. Ye product is for somebody who's got this level of spending strength, is in this target age group." Aspirational again in that space, but at the same time value for money. Then they were able to create this, right? What they did with the Kia Seltos or their first products initially translated directly into business impact with higher traffic, right? They were able to get those initial bookings as a brand that's brand new. India mein automobile brands, if you look at historically, very difficult to make that space, right? Maruti, Tata, Mahindra have this one part of the market, right? Hyundai.
Correct.
Then if you're going into the luxury zone, aspiration is to buy one of those German brands, right? You want a BMW, Audi, etc. ये जो middle space है, इसकी कभी respect थी नहीं. इसको crack करना बड़ा मुश्किल था, right? Hyundai failed with the Sonata, they failed with one version of the Tucson. Like हमारी generation के लिए iconic car है, but iconic इसलिए because very few people bought them back then. The sales did not work.
Right.
But for Kia to enter a market like India and then not be looked at just a different Hyundai Creta.
Correct.
Right? And they did it so well because badge engineered cars hain. You get the Toyota, the Glanza, the Baleno.
Right.
But there's no differentiation. They took the same thing and they packaged it well and then they communicated it. Even today they continue to do so. They partnered with the right comedians. Right. And if you look at, I think the latest thing they did was with Bobby Deol. Right? Such a good guy to pick for what they've done.
Exactly.
Right? Somebody who's kind of, with the last few films he's done, come back into the limelight and he has that Lord Bobby name status. So, and you're relaunching your product, which is badass by nature. So you pick a real badass and you're able to bring it in.
Exactly.
So that actually translated into business impact if you look at their sales figures. And even higher up in the funnel, if you look at it, okay, content strategy, website traffic, right? What does website traffic translate into? Higher bookings at dealerships. What did higher booking at dealership translate to? Some conversion. A lot of people initially would have bought the Seltos when they did not want another Creta. Right? And how did they differentiate not just in product but also in terms of colors, design, feature add-ons, etc. So I think that's a very good example of how creative strategy and their approach to branding took actual business impact. And I mean the sales numbers speak for themselves. So I'll also take one more example closer to home and personal experience, right? So I used to work with this brand called cashkaro.com.
Okay.
It's India's largest coupon and cashback website. Not a plug because I don't work there, but some brands you tend to love because of what you're able to create there. One thing we got right there, much like Kia was, we started off with a very intense content strategy, right? We were scaling content at an insane level. We were doing more articles than perhaps some small content agencies do in a day. And that translated into traffic on the website, that translated into higher website traffic, and more people signed up on the platform, more logins, right? And then of course you were able to identify which product category gets you what traffic. So until today I feel like the creative strategy there, when we had come up with the concept behind the brand tagline, that when I was working there, we came up with this thing called "You Get More Hamesha," right? Where all websites are talking about cashback milega, coupon milega, and we wanted to convey what the brand ethos is. So it's not just about customer ko you get more hamesha bol rahe. Even internally as a brand, if you work there, people actually got more hamesha. In the sense, I still tell people who get frustrated at different places, right? Every startup that's trying to grow fast, there's going to be hustle. You will have to work for a lot of hours, right? You will be working insane hours. There will be pressure. You will feel stressed, right? कौन है ऑफिस में जो बोलता नहीं है हफ्ते में 2 बार in a high stress environment कि I want to leave this place, right? But if you don't let that negativity impact you, what you are able to create is a space where you get rewarded for what you're doing. So we caught on to that and said, let's create that brand value where we say at Cashkaro you get more hamesha. And as a messaging which is consistent to internal customers who are employees, external customers who are potential shoppers, and then get them onto the platform with different kind of not just pure content play around the products they want to buy, but also create that curiosity that we used to be able to ask, right? At Cashkaro you get more. How do you get more hamesha? Find out. So now एक क्लिक तो दे देगा ना तू मुझे,
exactly.
तो क्लिक देगा मुझे देखने के लिए क्या मिल रहा है. And that kind of flow was able to work for us in terms of actual sales, right? I don't have numbers right now, but it would work really well is what I know from memory.
Right. So my question is, और ये हर मार्केटर का पेन पॉइंट है, ठीक है, उसकी प्रॉब्लम है, ठीक है. We face a lot of challenges while creating the content, creative strategy. How to tackle it?
Right. So we'll come to the usual problems I'm sure other people have shared with you. I feel there's one unique problem which I've seen in e-commerce, in fintech, I've seen it in the film industry, I've seen it in advertising, and I'm seeing it in other industries now. The lack of writers with domain-specific knowledge who can create content that is not flowery fluff. Content writing has become this world where 500 वर्ड लिख दो, 700 वर्ड लिख दो, does it mean anything? Right? Ideally, the goal is
You have actually hit the right nail.
ideal goal is कम बोलो, कम लिखो, but ज़्यादा बोलो. In the sense, how much can I convey in 14 words, right? So in my head, I think one sentence should be 14 words. After every 3 sentences, there should be space.
Right.
And in 3 paragraphs, if you can't tell me what you want to say, you don't know what you want to say,
Exactly.
right?
Right.
Unfortunately, for different, and that's true even for SEO content, right? Because SEO में एक वो belief होता है 5000 वर्ड लिख दो, पेज स्क्रॉल करता रहे, endless scroll.
Quality quantity में convert हो गई है.
Tech logic लगाए जा रहे हैं, right?
Right.
That part works, sure. But if that entire thing is good content, it works. So I think one pain point is just finding the right content people, because a lot of content writers are not people who wanted to write. उनको लिखने का मन नहीं था. They just became content writers because this was what they did. It was easy money, right? It was low effort, high return for some people, because there are two kinds of people in the world, right? People who think writing is so difficult, and people who think यार इससे easy कोई काम ही नहीं है, right? So till this date on my resume, I have not changed this one line which I had from the beginning, right? I call myself a professional blank page defeater. Why? Because that is one job where CEOs will pay you to ghostwrite for them, right? Marketing head will pay you to write campaign briefs for them, right? Advertising agencies will pay you to write pitches for them.
Correct.
लिखना नहीं है किसी को, कोई लिखना ही नहीं चाहता.
Right.
So and today with AI, it should become easier. But even then कोई लिखना नहीं चाहता. क्यों? Because आपको AI को भी brief देना है. आप गंदा brief दोगे, आपको ChatGPT से भी गंदा result मिलेगा.
आप prompt ही नहीं दे पाओगे तो response कैसे expect कर सकते हो?
Yeah. So now good content creators are not just writing. Now they're saying, come attend my workshop or listen to my podcast on how to write good prompts, right?
Right.
People are so lazy, मैं prompt लिखना सीख लूंगा, but मैं लिखने का concept नहीं सीखूंगा. So that becomes the biggest struggle. I think that's a challenge, because, and not just externally to the audience, but even internally when talking to your office people, right? If somebody in the sales team cannot communicate to marketing कि क्या problem है, if you can't write that good email, you will struggle. Right? Everything cannot be a 2-hour meeting or a call.
That's important, yes.
So I think it starts with, like, I hate long emails. मैं दिल पे पत्थर लग के लंबे email लिखता हूँ when, and it's only in a situation where there are too many people to communicate to, and you cannot get on a call with all of them because somebody's in the States, somebody's here. So I'm like, this is going to be a long email, right? But ideally, you want to keep it small, and I still follow that principle. मैंने आपको email क्यों किया है? First line should be, why am I emailing you? Problem क्या है?
Right.
क्या हुआ, क्यों हुआ, कैसे हुआ, और अब मैं क्या करने वाला हूँ?
Right.
Right? So that becomes one pain point. The other pain point, I think, is just inside organizations, getting creative ideas approved is a big challenge, and people struggle with it.
Right.
Because generally we believe that people who we are working with should understand where I'm coming from.
Right.
And they should support me, and they have the burden of understanding my idea. नहीं ना, जिसको आप pitch कर रहे हो, customer को आप pitch करने के लिए respect करते हो, but even the person sitting next to me in the other team, I have to convince him.
Right.
In fact, as marketers, we are constantly, हमारा एक ही काम है, लोगों को convince करना, right?
Correct.
पूरा सच बोल के, आधा सच बोल के, whatever your strategy is at different levels, right? As long as it's ethical and you're not doing any harm to someone,
Exactly.
your job is to pitch and make that communication work.
Right.
And almost, I believe, in a progressive disclosure manner. मैं customers से honest हो सकता हूँ अपने in my ad copy, but inside my office, when I'm talking to people and I'm pitching something creative, in every space I see, there has to be progressive disclosure. If on step 1 you say ये campaign है, 50 लाख रुपए लगेंगे. If these two pieces of information come together, my answer probably is नहीं. क्यों? मुझे आपने कुछ अच्छा दिया ही नहीं to bite for, right? If you start with, I have an idea, it costs 0 rupees and it has the potential to give me 10 sales. It has the potential to give me 1 sale, but because it costs 0 rupees, now I'm listening to you. So I think the first step is to the challenge is to actually convince people within the organization to go for a crazy idea, right? Or what they think is a crazy idea, and establish how it still resonates with the brand.
Right.
And I think the third biggest thing is consistency.
Very important.
It's very difficult in all kinds of spaces कि आपने brand बना दिया, या आपने एक campaign बना दिया, आपने एक catchphrase बना दिया, but apart from the 4 people who actually maybe worked on it, nobody is consistently using it, right? If you have a campaign title, एक hashtag बना के डाल दिया आपने social media पे, उससे कुछ नहीं होगा. How do you get it to be used multiple times within the organization? That old struggle ना to become a verb, Google कर ले, वो customer को मैं कहता हूँ customer को छोड़ दो, आप अपने office के अंदर ना एक ये create कर लो. So I have this thing wherever I go, and every single place I've gone to, I've tried to create some variation of this. I call it the content requirement document.
Okay.
मेरा लाइफ में गोल होता है CRD रेज करना है, ये एक वर्ब बन जाए ऑफिस में.
Exactly.
राइट क्योंकि when we're working with tech, then it's assumed कि यार मैं टिकट रेज करूंगा जीरा पे. Right? When I'm talking to HR, it's obvious that I'm going to go to my HRMS, whatever it is, and I'm going to raise a query.
Right.
But when I'm talking to marketing, तो मैं SMS भी कर सकता हूँ किसी को, मैं WhatsApp पे लिख सकता हूँ, right? And I can be like एक अच्छा सा campaign बना दो. There's no brief. Right. And it's not the person's fault. Right. Right. And that's the biggest learning. जो बोल रहा है, it's not his job to know. Right. But his job to help you. So that content requirement document which I create, for example, I try to capture the basics of who's in charge, who will approve this, where does the buck stop, right? Why are we doing this? इसका objective क्या है, इसका goal क्या है, कब तक चाहिए, right? Half the things will end at कब तक चाहिए, because the moment someone comes and says this was needed yesterday, and I'm saying then you should have come to me day before yesterday, right? ये cool हो गया है, this was needed yesterday. I understand you're trying to create a sense of urgency, but you're opening the conversation with something that will probably piss off the marketer you're working with, right? So abhi thoda you have to work with the person and say, okay, I have somewhat of a brief in my head, you know, I have something, can we talk about it? Nobody will say no. Yeah. So that becomes a struggle to kind of just consistently create that phrase or that document or that logo or that design. That consistency becomes a pain, and it's one of the hardest challenges, right? I would be lying if I said कि मैंने crack कर लिया, right? नहीं किया यार, 15 साल हो गए, ये crack नहीं किया, ये हर जगह effort होता है, and it's different for every organization, where you have to find out how do I get these people to consistently do it, because it's not easy, right? आपकी टीम में 10 लोग हैं, हो सकता है 7 लोग driven हैं, right? Best case scenario, right? कि 7 लोग बहुत driven हैं and they are fighting for it and they will do it. But even the 3 people who are not,
reverse ही होता है.
Otherwise reverse ही होता है. तो और वो 3 लोग बेचारे उनका दिल टूट रहा होता है हर दिन, right? They are dying every day because they are really passionate about what they are doing, and they are working with people who are not that passionate. Right. And that will be the truth in every single place, because if you hire 10 people who are passionate, they'll keep fighting with each other. Right. Exactly. So you need 2-3 passionate people who are torchbearers, who will fight and come up with great ideas and struggle, and who will work really hard. But you also need other people who will bring that stability to that team. Exactly. Who will ask the questions like, you know, I will not do this till XYZ process is followed. So the only solution I think I found to it is process. If you create a process, it may take longer, it will frustrate people because the process annoys, it takes more time, but the process is the only long-term solution for creating that consistency. So, you know, get everything approved by XYZ, follow this process of email approval, follow this process of raising tickets. आप ये सब करो, अगर आप ये सब चीजें follow कर रहे हो, तो चांस है कि आप consistent, I think 9 out of 10 is consistent for me, right? 10 out of 10 is not what we're aiming for, but 9 out of 10 is consistent, and that is perhaps a big challenge.
So let's talk about the role of data and analytics in building a creative strategy.
Right. So it's a thing that I think a lot of creative people used to hate. And I think now anybody who's successful in this field has learned to love data, right? Because you start with the emotion of thinking, oh, we're doing creative stuff and it's going to work, and इसको measure कैसे कर सकते हो आप, ये तो art है, right? And then one of my teachers from my AIB days, Sudhanshu sir, used to say something, you guys are not artists, तुम मजदूर हो, right? And वो मुझे इतना hard hit करता है, right? There is this, again, there's this song by Divine where he says, मजदूर वाले हाथ जब तक जान तब तक भागता रहे, ऐसा एक lyrics. But the point I was trying to make here was that when you are looking at creative strategy and you don't measure it, you're doing a huge disservice to all other creative marketers. Because then anybody who's got no experience or no real knowledge can pretend to do, you know, be a creative marketer. So data today with all the tools we have is super important because it lets you make better decisions. And I've also learned that data and analytics does not mean that you have to be really good at mathematics, right? I was terrible at maths in school, and the only time I'm good at maths is when it comes to, you know, when somebody says 5 oranges थे, उसके पास 10 oranges थे, मैंने कहा वो मर जाएं यार जिनके पास oranges थे, right? But if someone says, oh, this 10,000 rupees, इतने का क्या है, then चमकता है, right? Because then it impacts you. So if we look at how you can actually incorporate data into your creative marketing efforts is to not do anything without a clear number attached to it, right? It could be the smallest thing, which doesn't really give you direct impact. Social media की बात करते हैं, right? Social media पे there's a lot of vanity metrics, right? Followers, likes, impressions, and in itself it doesn't mean anything. If you think about it from a business perspective, it's good to have, you feel good, have a lot of followers, have a lot of subscribers.
These are feel good factors only,
right? These are feel good factors
for a business perspective,
unless you're able to tie it down to how many impressions do I need for one sale.
Exactly.
So वो पूरा funnel till you measure, right? And you usually measure नीचे, further down the funnel, right? But once you've got that funnel, you can actually go back and say, instead of just saying leads to conversion देख रहा है, सब देख रही है, दुनिया देख रही है, but क्या आपने impressions to conversions calculate किया है कभी, right? आपने नहीं किया because जो team ये data पे काम करती है, उस team को फर्क नहीं पड़ता social media team क्या कर रही है, and the social media team is not held accountable till this degree, right? I mean, more and more organizations are doing it now, where you are expected to, you know, create some kind of impact. But if you're able to measure the growth of followers, right? What is your month-on-month growth? Compare it with your competitors. There are great tools which can let you see what your competitors are doing today, right? So why not a benchmark मिल गया? Because when you say, oh, we grew by 1,000 followers, is that good? Is that bad? Like, who decides, right? That benchmark tells you, right? Is 1,000 good? You may be feeling happy, मेरे 1,000 followers बढ़ रहे हैं, right? But आपके competition के 10,000 बढ़ रहे हैं. That's a reality check. That's a reality check. And then the KPI can be set based on that, right? कि this is what the benchmark is, so I need to get X plus.
Exactly.
Right? And then go further down the funnel with it. Okay, impressions आ गए, likes आ गए, comments आ गए. उसको combine करके impact क्या आ रहा है? Does that increase traffic to your website? Right. Does that increase, you know, sign-ups on your website? Does that give you more queries? लोग form भर रहे हैं कि नहीं? ये मिडिल के जो मेट्रिक्स है ना, छोटे छोटे, ये बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाते हैं. आई थिंक इफ यू डोंट मेजर
एक्शंस क्या हो रहे हैं,
हाँ, एवरी स्टेप पे छोटे छोटे एक्शंस क्या हो रहे हैं, एंड इट गेट्स, if you open GA and you're a web business, right? It's very easy for you to get overwhelmed because GA is giving you now GA4. If you navigated the world of GA4 and dealt with that frustration, now there's so much data being thrown your way,
right?
And it's the problem of our life, right? Too much choice. What do I do with this data?
Exactly.
So instead of just having that dashboard, I think you first ask this question, and a colleague of mine taught me this. Whenever I used to go to him for data, he was a data guy, right? He used to ask me, what is the question that you want to ask this data? First tell me that. तुम्हारा सवाल क्या है? And then look at data, because otherwise you look at data and you get lost. क्यों मेरी reach high हो, अच्छा ये क्यों हो गया? Question था ही नहीं आपका ये, right? So all these metrics which we call vanity metrics, they add up to something,
right?
So you can calculate how many comments did I get in the month where my followers grew, versus how many comments did I get in the month where my followers did not grow. Does my audience interact with me more by sharing my content, by liking my comments, or by liking my content, or by commenting on my post?
Exactly.
Right? So sure, it's good to have interaction, but is it important to have interaction on weekdays or weekends?
Right.
When is your audience available for that interaction?
Exactly.
Are you posting a quiz on a day where the person is in office, वो भी सुबह अपने बॉस से डांट खा रहा है कि उसका सेल्स टारगेट मीट नहीं हुआ, और आप उससे पूछ रहे हो what kind of marketing strategy do you like, right? वो नहीं कर रहा रिप्लाई, आप डांट पड़ रही है. So वो फिगर आउट करना इंपॉर्टेंट रहता है, and once you have that plug, you can tie it down to whatever your last mile metric is.
Right. So कुछ case studies के बारे में बात करते हैं, where creative strategies turned into tangible outcomes,
right?
And what lessons you learned from that?
Sure. So we spoke about patience. One brand campaign that one creative brand campaign that really is a lesson in patience was one that we all know. Dove का Real Beauty campaign था, right? Now I used to always feel like, what is the impact of a campaign like this? Sure, it's emotionally great. You're connecting with your audience. Women are relating to it. But is it really translating into anything worthwhile? Right? So again, before we spoke, and because we had discussed that we would look into it, I dove a little deeper into what did that campaign actually turn into.
I mean, content तो कर रहे हो,
market तो कर रहे हो, market भी कर रहे हो, लोगों को emotionally, you know, there's a perception that you're like, oh, this must have worked.
Right.
But we don't have to live with it as consumers, right? Whoever came up with the campaign has to live with it, and I'm sure that the people who worked on it, knowing that it took this much patience, it almost feels like it may have been multiple people who changed, and I don't know who feels that close to the campaign, but there was an article where they spoke about the impact that campaign created over a 10-year period.
Achha.
Right? And it created some 4.5 billion views on some page. I'll tell you again, right? I wrote these things down so I don't forget. So see, basically what they did was, they had their sales jumped from 2.5 billion to 4 billion within 10 years.
Acha.
Right?
Okay.
Now, I feel like you can almost give a gold medal to the senior management that approved the idea and let it live. Because हम इतने impatient हैं, in 6 months we want to come up with a new campaign idea, new strategy, right? The customer's attention span is very short and they are looking at your brand for a very brief period and they forget about you. But patience and long periods ke upar, if you like over a very long period of time, if your communication is confident and stays the same, it's boring. It's almost like investments, right? It's boring. But the boring way is often the way that will work. And that was one lesson from Dow, where I said, yaar, inne 10 saal ke period ko study kiya hai. You know, that can only happen at a very high level. I don't think an individual contributor or a team can even think about it.
That happens at a higher level.
And it would be pretentious to believe that they knew this would happen.
Right.
They did it and then it happened. And then they correlated it saying, oh, we did this campaign, so ye hua. But the fact that it ran through that period is a big thing. Similarly, another brand that is, you know, advertising space mein jo aise legendary status hai, Old Spice ke jo campaigns say, right? Now in India we know Milind Soman, but there's again I'll show you, usme bhi thoda data hai, so I'll browse through that part, right? So they did this funny ads, right, where there would be, you know, Terry Crews hota tha, abs hain uske aur kuch funny bol raha hai, right, things like that. So I'll tell you this, they said within 30 days of launching that campaign, they saw 107% increase in sales.
Wow.
And not just broadly, in the body care product that they were advertising.
Wow.
Right? Again, we don't know the story behind it. What was the sale pehle? Because 107% growth from what? Right? So I also feel it's important. It's also important to not get super impressed by these figures. But the learning is that they did that humorous campaign and they did not just pat their back, you know, like great work, great agency, hire kar li thi humne, everybody knows about it. I feel good that my campaign was out there, but did it tie itself to a business outcome?
Correct.
That's the part that you need to measure, and they were able to, right? So similarly, they did also some, जो हम vanity metrics की बात कर रहे थे, right? This 107 के पीछे क्या लगा? वो मैं ढूंढ रहा था, right? कि अच्छा 107 सुन के अच्छा लग रहा है. अब when you hear कितनी मेहनत के बाद ये हुआ है, you will realize कितना, what is the level of content virality that is needed to actually create impact. Okay. So they had 40 million YouTube views. Okay. And in the first week, they had 2700% increase in Twitter followers. Achha. They had 800% an increase in their Facebook interactions. Wow. And 300% increase in traffic to the Old Spice website. Wow. Now, in सबके बाद 100% हुआ है, right? 107%. एक team. This is not one team. This is multiple teams. The campaign was created, right? The social media team has adopted it. The offline team has adopted it, right? At some level, you know, even in consumer communication, they are doing it. The packaging had some imagery related to that campaign. So it was. अब तो मतलब it's a bastardized term to say in the current world, but omni-channel approach था, जो हम बड़ा बोलते हैं omni-channel था, वो था, so and that worked for them. So I think these were few, you know, case studies that are actually available online if someone's interested to go and read about them. I found these, you know, आजकल हम जो बोलते हैं मैंने research किया, it means I spent 2 घंटा on Google, right? मैं Google किया, I went. Like if I really researched, I went to the 4th page of Google. Right? So, it's available and you can find out how it worked. So there are these brands that have nailed it, and they've nailed it with a lot of money behind it, and a lot of time behind it. The beauty is either you decide that you can choose between spending money or time. I think that choice is often available. It's easy to spend money and grow, but at the same time, not everyone who has that budget can spend it the right way either. Exactly. Right? So when people say budget nahi, asli nahi ho raha, nahi. If you can make it work with nothing, then you will be able to make it work better with something. Yeah, so that's true. You get that good content. I'm sure you see that on your podcast or on your own page, right? That hopefully this will be one of those, right? When you post something that's interesting, आपकी मेहनत कम हो जाती है. Right. Content is working for you. Right. But when you post something that is say drab and it's not engaging, it may be very information rich. Right. But people are not interacting with it. Right. That difference, I think.
Now let's discuss about some innovative approaches in creative strategy.
Right. So there are 3 things that I'll talk to you about, right? And I'm almost reminding myself. So tech, social media, and what was the third one? Chal dekhte hain. So in terms of tech, I feel like we've heard these terms, AI, MR, you know, virtual reality, but it's always interesting to explore these concepts and see if there's something that you can do for your individual purpose. It doesn't have to be a very wide implementation. Perhaps if you have, say, some kind of an offline activation, right? Abhi Apple has that Vision Pro, right? It's the talk of the town. It'll get attention. So you bring a product like that. Now what you're showing the customer once he wears that headset is a different matter. But it's a hook for you to create that little section in your stall, right? Or near your workplace where somebody comes and experiences it. What you're able to get out of that is customer ki isolated attention milna na ke, it's impossible, right? Today. Even when we are talking to each other, at the back of my mind, I am thinking of the notifications on my phone, you're checking time, right? Ye chalta hai. Ye hamara second nature hai. We are distracted as a generation and why even blame the generation? Even our parents are distracted now, right? जो बोलते थे फोन पे मत रहो, वो भी फोन पे.
I was saying the same thing to my mother. हम जब स्कूल में थे तो आप बोलते थे कि आप फोन पे ज्यादा लगे रहते हो. And
now it's reverse. So I think the biggest way to use tech is to create an immersive experience,
right?
And find a way to integrate with your product so that the customer or a potential customer, let's say, has given you their undivided attention, because that is gold,
right,
for a marketer.
Correct.
And then if you put them in a space like this, you are talking to all their senses, right? You create a great visual piece of content where the audio is impressive, right? You create something dramatic where they can hear, say, the machine you're selling, or hear the, even a simple video of your phone being put together can be interesting. If you pick up what are the trends, right? Okay, ASMR content is going viral. Let me pick that element, have really engaging audio, then have really interesting visuals to go with it, and communicate whatever that one single, and I stress on one single message because usse zyada yaad nahi rahega.
Exactly.
So what is your one single message that you want the person to take away, and you give that to them for 20 minutes, and you do it in a setup जहाँ line लग गई है, right? Because जहाँ पे आपने line लगा दी ना, वहाँ पे आप जीत गए, right? Whether it's virtual or physical, if you've created that queue, you won. So I think using tech to make that draw, find out what's hot today, and if you can afford it, create that queue of potential customers to interact. Again, it's one of those things that you'll be able to do very rarely, because it will usually be a big budget.
And I feel this is the mantra for businesses also to stay ahead in this competitive landscape.
Yeah, so if you see the bigger brands, they've always done stuff like this, right? Like if you look at, say, offline activation done by brands like Coke, they had a campaign where they put a refrigerator where you could get free Coke. उसको लेने के लिए आपको ऊपर से निकालना है, and they put it at a station. So now random people had to come together and open it, right? How much real, how much was it staged, we won't get into that. But we'll talk about the fact that it was shot well, it was put out, and it was a physical location where people could come and try it out. Becomes interesting. So to the second part of what you were saying, of how are brands staying ahead of the curve, I think that is partially industry specific, but it's become very, very important to be a when we studied brands, there were different types of brands, and being a conscious brand was a choice back then. I think today you don't have that luxury. If you're a consumer facing brand that's known, if you're in B2B, you're a part supplier or something, sure, maybe you can get away with it because the business doesn't really have a heart for what goes behind, say, what product I'm procuring. Although even larger organizations now will have to do more and more of that. So if you can create that kind of conscious approach to your business, because especially the next generation, that's ab Gen Alpha aa gaya na, if I'm correct,
Alpha
means I'm still cool, right? So ab Gen Alpha aa gaya, so now
मुझे भी 2 हफ्ते पहले पता लगा.
See, we are the audience that is trying to stay ahead of the curve. But that audience is, they care about their environment. They, एक time पे it was a gimmick, right? To create environment friendly material use किया है हमने. It became a gimmick, let's say, right? For a lot of brands. But now people actually care about it. And if you can give them that, even we care about it slightly more, I feel, right? When you see a plastic bottle somewhere, you feel like, yaar, ye glass bottle ho sakti thi, right? Small things. Or when you're, so it's not just about, bigger brands are talking about this ESG and they're dealing with it. And it's something that we need to work towards, leave a better world for the people. But right now it's very important for brands and organizations to try and be the champions of that and catch on to what are the trends in this space, right? For packaging companies, for bottling companies, for food brands, right? Small things actually matter. Like if somebody's even slightly conscious about what their impact is. Just yesterday, I was watching this random reel on Instagram, right? Where someone spoke about when we cut a milk packet, the little piece falls.
Right.
That is the one piece that's not easy to catch. That will definitely go to the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
And the only one step that now I need to change in life is usko aise mat kato, slide se kato, so that it stays part of the packet. Right? And that reel becoming viral is because more and more people are thinking of things like this. That we are thinking ki chalo, let us not do something that has negative business impact or no business impact, but can I find small things that will make a big difference? Right. So even say at my current organization, when we, and I remember this because we spoke about this just in the morning, that we have a building that is, a LEED Platinum 4. It is one of the few buildings in the world that, LEED Platinum rated, one of the few buildings in the world that is, there's no air conditioning. It's all through walls. So the building is sustainable, rainwater is being harvested. A lot of the basics implemented, solar is powering the building. So things like that matter. And they matter a lot more than to other people, to people in the organization. Right. I feel good that my company is doing this. I feel like my brand is a good brand. Right? So it becomes harder for you to offset the damage that you're doing. We're living in a consumer society. We're producing products. There is nothing you can produce without creating some kind of, output that will be harmful to the environment. The question is, how much can I do to reduce that? And that I think is very important. Stay ahead of the curve in terms of impact on planet. In terms of creative strategy, the other part of staying ahead of the curve, I think, is social media. And hear me out, I'm not talking about a Facebook or a LinkedIn or a Twitter. Every single day, you can discover a new social media platform today. Right? There are smaller platforms where, say in the past, there was Quora, Reddit, where people would, really marketers were thinking, how do I make this work? There are smaller buckets of apps that have come out, which are small social media networks. There was one that was called Secret, I think, back in the day. If you can monetize, or if you can advertise there, if you can create content there, what makes the news is not just the fact that you created good content, but there's a new platform that's there. Right. So that kind of a hype can be created where you become the leader to do that. Right. Most of the times we are following the trend. Most of the time we are following a trend, and then it becomes a mega trend, and then we start following it, right? Like LinkedIn influencers, right? Or you're looking at TikTok aaya tha India mein, chala gaya, then Instagram Reels came, then YouTube Shorts came. If you're following, you're participating in what's happening in the market. That your team has to do. But one part of it should just be, what is it that nobody else is doing, where I will try my hand and I might fail, but can I, say for example, advertise on Tinder? And we did this in the past for one of the brands I used to work with, right? Where we created a profile on Tinder, two profiles, two cartoon images, एक लड़के की profile, एक लड़की की profile, right? And we were getting people to sign up to, we were creating hype for an invite-only app. And we created two profiles where people could talk on Tinder to the profiles, even though they know they are cartoons. And you would basically start that chat, right? वो pre-fed messages थे हमारे पास जो बोलेंगे, and it would ultimately end at download the app or sign up for the list, right? The number of people who signed up for that, I think, like we got some 200, 300 people, right? Not a huge number. I'm not saying it was, हमने scale करके फाड़ दिया. But 300 लोग आए from a channel जो किसी और के पास नहीं है, right? So if I'm doing everything right, plus I have a new channel. And that Tinder profile, of course, the interesting thing was more guys were talking to the female cartoon than women to the male cartoon. So that female cartoon profile, you were getting all kinds of conversations, even though they knew it's a cartoon, even though they knew it's some brand profile, right? Because people have the time to interact if you make it interesting, and you can get them to sign up on something. The other part of it was everyone who discovered it, right, felt like telling one more person, कि यार ये देख ये लोग क्या कर रहे हैं. So if we can create ये देख ये लोग क्या कर रहे हैं on a new app, that works really well. And finally, personalization and AI. I'll talk about those in like संक्षिप्त में बोलने की कोशिश करता हूँ. We're all using AI, we're all using ChatGPT, a lot of people are using Perplexity, people are using Photo Room, people are using Photopea, बहुत चीज़ use कर रहे हैं हम. But the goal is to not explore every app that is out there. To sit with your team and figure out मेरी team में क्या gap है. What is it that we can't do right now? Say for example, I'm working in a space where I don't have a video editor, and I don't have someone who has, and I don't want to consciously put that budget because I don't feel that skill alone should become a job, right? Because I've seen that in the past where there is not enough work to give to the editor, right? You're not shooting enough, script नहीं खत्म हुई, shoot नहीं हुआ, कोई बीमार हो, एक resource idle बैठ जाता है, right? Which becomes a problem. Why can't my social media person who is the face of the content also edit? Today you don't need to know Photoshop, you don't need to know FCP, you don't need to know Premiere Pro, right? Filmora नहीं चाहिए. You can open an app on your mobile phone, pay 2,000 rupees, buy the annual membership. वो tutorial में आपको editing सिखा भी देगा. वो आपको बताएगा यहाँ पे J-cut लगाओ, वो आपको बताएगा यहाँ पे sound fade करो, वो बोलेगा यहाँ पे blend करना है, वो बोलेगा audio export कर लो, right? So everything I could do on say a Premiere Pro or FCP during my days, I can do on my phone, right? When do I need that? When do I need a DSLR? When do I need a MacBook Pro? When I'm shooting something on 4K and it needs to be shot on 4K. अपन लोग 4K में क्यों शूट करेंगे अपने आप को, right? Right. If I'm shooting inside a house, मुझे नहीं चाहिए वो क्वालिटी. मेरा end use क्या है? If my end use is not to put it in a cinema hall, if my end use is not to make it a television ad, if it's going to be on YouTube and most things are just going to be digital, I don't need that quality. I need, say, perhaps 1080p चाहिए मुझे, and I want it to be under XMB so that I can put it, right? I need a good thumbnail, create it on Canva, right? I need a good, so that kind of a thing is important. I don't want to just call this upskilling, right? It's actually identifying that gap in your team and telling people that इसके लिए resource नहीं लगेगा, इसके लिए तू सीख, when we reach the peak of what you can do, then we'll go आगे. So it's discovering these new platforms and it cannot happen if you don't give your team time. अगर वो सुबह 8 बजे से रात के 10 बजे तक stress है, right? Sure, maybe he's working from 9 to 5, he's gone home. But if he's still thinking about, or if you're still trying to solve that problem, नहीं हो पाएगा. And वो create करना पड़ता है. And it's understandable, it can't be created throughout the year, right? Because normal work has to proceed. Right. You're a support function, right? As a creative or a marketing team, you're not, धंधा तुम नहीं ला रहे हो, तुम धंधे को support कर रहे हो. Exactly. तो जब धंधे के पास time है, जब धंधा अच्छा है, तब you can think of, let me send this person and teach them XYZ. Exactly. Right? So that versus, I would choose that over saying, let's do an online IIM course, ye wo. Do it, great, right? Adds pride. But if it's not solving the gap in your team, right, then acha hai, the office is getting someone a degree for free. Right.
So what do you want to say to our aspiring marketers, those who want to build their career in this industry?
Right. So aspire करते रहो. But more importantly, I would say that if you want to be a marketer, I don't know why. Why do you want to be a marketer in life? You always want to be something else and you become a marketer. But the single most important thing is to be able to tell a story. So understand what a story is, and कहानी बताना अगर आप सीख जाओगे, तो whatever the mode is, whatever the channel is, or whatever the industry or problem is, you'll be able to do your core job of getting that message across. Because most times what you need to communicate is something very drab, and the consumer doesn't want to hear it. Consumer doesn't want to know आपने क्या 10 feature add किया, आपका product 5 minutes faster हो गया, whatever it is, right? So the main lesson is, how do I tell a story in a way that it makes something boring interesting. So as long as you're able to make something boring interesting, your life is going to be great. You're going to be an amazing marketer.
So Rishabh, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And it was indeed an insightful and informational podcast that we had shot with you. And I hope हमारे listeners को बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिलेगा. They'll be able to learn a lot many things specifically into content and creative strategies. So thank you guys. Thank you so much.